Okay, so welcome back to day 2 of our training on the introduction to the spirals of inquiry. This is episode 3, which includes stages 3 and 4 of the spiral of inquiry, developing a hunch and learning. So in developing a hunch, we're really asking, how are we contributing to this situation? Developing a hunch is the third part of the spiral of inquiry, and it's where we begin to consider what our guesses are about what led to the situation we're exploring. Importantly, it should be about how we might be contributing to the situation. Consideration should be thoughtful but also cautious. It's important here not to jump to conclusions. It's also important to say that the phases of the inquiry spiral are not rigidly sequential. They often overlap and evidence from one informs the next. But it's also possible to be taken back as new information is provided. We might loop back to the beginning. We might need to do a little bit more focusing or an additional scan based on developing a hunch. Surprises are inevitable, and in many ways, hunches are about what might be leading to what. So our intuition and our hunches, together with relevant evidence, inform scanning. They guide focusing, but in this phase of the spiral, we're consciously bringing to the surface individual hunches about what we're doing that might be leading to the specific situation for members of our school community. And as we do this, we start to develop a collective understanding of hunches. So again, hopefully now a familiar format. We're going to just spend a little bit of time sharing what developing a hunch is and what developing a hunch is not. So developing a hunch is about getting deeply held beliefs out onto the table about our own practices. Our practices that we can do something about, and checking our assumptions for accuracy before moving ahead. Developing hunches is not a general brainstorm of all possibilities. It should be guided and informed from the scanning and focusing stages and be relevant to the information we're already gathering. Developing a hunch is not about being obsessed with everyone else's hunches or issues over which we have limited influences. It should be about focused hunches. And developing a hunch is not about venting about the past or fuming about the present. We really want to hold developing a hunch as an active and positive way of staying in the moment. So on to the why then. Why do we need to develop hunches? Members of your community are likely to have hunches or guesses about why the situation is as it is. However, we might consider that, for example, parents will have different hunches to teachers, and teachers might have different hunches to students. So this stage enables us to bring all of these hunches to the surface in a safe and non-blaming context. As hunches come to the surface, it's vital to look at the things that we can effectively change and influence. It's unhelpful to spend lots of time thinking about unchangeable aspects on which we might place blame for difficulties. We'll learn as we go along the spiral to sort of push where it moves. A hunch may not be completely accurate, but it is essential that we consider it, seeking evidence to work out whether it might or might not be useful. So developing a hunch is really about incorporating the intuition of all members of our community so that we can look at the things that we can effectively change and influence. We wanted to present the how do we do developing a hunch slide in a slightly different format from how you will have seen it in both focusing and scanning. And this is because we really wanted to reflect the more cyclical nature of the developing a hunch stage of the spiral of inquiry. So what is a hunch? Well, it's about opportunities to reflect on themes. It's to enable tentative statements about issues. It's about listening to all voices and creating safe spaces for communication. So you'll see as you move from that stage, we've presented some tips for testing the hunch. So we suggest testing them quickly using data gathering methods such as focus groups or questionnaires, or you could do boxes where comments can be placed, and really holding on to this key message of involving a cross-section of staff, pupils and families. But it's also important within this to consider which voice the hunch has come from and ensure that the voices of others are considered. And then we'll loop round into this sort of checking stage within developing a hunch. So considering the evidence and the story that's forming, is our hunch accurate? If it seems incorrect, we might need to shift the focus and look at a new hunch. We'll need to make sure, though, that we're recording all of the information gathered from the first hunch and considering the learning from it. So it might be that we discard a hunch after it's presented, but it's really important we hold it as part of our evidence for understanding the wellbeing needs of our communities. Because even if it's not important for this specific spiral of inquiry, every spiral that you enact within your school community will enhance your understanding of the wellbeing needs of the members within it. So before we invite you to pause the training again and have a bit of a play around with the developing a hunch stage, we just wanted to return to the vignette and offer a little bit more update to guide you with this practice. So the additional information says that you focused on discrepancies between responses in the focusing stage. Within your staff team, administrative staff, your caretakers and cleaning staff found the online delivery to be easier. Administrative staff reported greater ease in setting up the event, and your cleaning staff and caretakers reported the ease of not having to make additional childcare arrangements for the later finish associated with in-person delivery. Your teaching staff, however, reported challenges with the online system and a sense of not feeling they were connecting in the same way. The latter was echoed by parents. Pupils, however, presented more mixed responses. Some found the online format easier, whereas others felt they were missing out in some way. Hopefully that's enabled you to have a bit of a go with developing a hunch and to get a sense for what that stage of the spiral of inquiry might look like. In the live session, we again sought some feedback about the experiences of the developing a hunch stage. We asked what hunches people came up with, how they decided on who needed to be involved, and just general thoughts and feedback about the developing hunches stage of the spiral of inquiry. Some of the feedback that we received from this is included on this slide. So one group said that they had a hunch that it was about technology. We felt that it was a bit different. Staff had different feelings about what had happened, so they assumed that staff were one big collective, but they aren't. There are different ideas held by different staff, and they noted that they need to ensure that this is the case for all members of the community. So a reflection there that actually we can cluster members of our school communities together, staff, pupils, parents and carers, and believe that the opinions are collective for that group, and just really highlighting here the importance of discrepancies within groups and how important it is to gather from lots of members within different sections of school communities to make sure you're getting the best sense of what's going on. Other feedback noted that people may put different things on the table, so they wanted to try and create context for those conversations to take place, and we'd really support this as well in our kind of guidance on the developing a hunch stage of the spiral of inquiry. It's really important that we're creating contexts that feel safe, where people can present ideas and these can be heard and held by the people leading the developing a hunch stage of the spiral of inquiry.
Okay, so we've reached the learning section of the spiral of inquiry, the learning stage, and the tag, the secondary title for this is how and where will we learn more about what to do. So this is the stage where we've taken what we've kind of gathered through the previous stages of the spiral, and we're thinking about what learning do we need to kind of support what we're going to do next. So following on from developing a hunch, learning is the next stage in the spiral, as we can see in the diagram here. The learning stage is defined as how and where can we learn more about what to do, and the main challenge really at this stage is to decide what to learn and how to learn it. An example might be the secondary school that finds out through this spiral about the negative reputation of the school in the community in relation to well-being, and decides to study the research on social and emotional aspects of learning and of schools. In this case, if new learning is about improving well-being, then what is known about social and emotional needs, about the 5 areas of well-being, is thought to be most relevant. We're, we're learning all the time as we go through the spiral. It's characteristic of all of the process in a way, especially when moving through the spiral of inquiry. But this is the stage where we really think about what we need to learn to take the spiral process forward. The aim of this stage is to seek out fresh ideas using suggestions from our community, from other schools, from the evidence base, from the literature, and to collate ideas around what might make a difference. It really can be quite uncomfortable for some to seek new ideas about how to approach things or what will happen next. It's really human to feel that way, and to kind of instead prefer to sit in the way that we've always thought and done things. Very often as human beings, we think in ways that lend to the if I do X, then Y will happen kind of mindset. Sitting with the uncertainty and the unknown is a key part of this process of the spiral of inquiry, and it's the learning stage where we can start to find information around what we're trying to achieve. Without knowing how or why the new approaches are better than what we've previously tried, we're less likely to consistently implement changes, and learning really is where we find this out. The learning stage allows us to join what we have heard from our community and the existing literature together to create a bespoke plan to create meaningful change in the community that puts wellbeing at the centre. It really is a stage of the process where we're actively going out and researching, reading into, and finding out. So I suppose there's an emphasis on the time and the energy at that stage to be able to go and do that research level to facilitate the learning process of the spiral itself. So as we've typically done, as we've gone through the training, we thought it would be helpful to look at what the learning stage is and what it's not. So learning in the spiral of inquiry is motivated by and connected to changing the well-being experiences of our community. It's directly linked to the focus identified in the earlier parts of the spiral. It is about understanding why new ways of doing things are better than previous practices, and it's sustained and supported over time. In the spiral of inquiry, learning is not about what someone else thinks would be useful or readily available. Instead, it's really connected to the spiral process as you move through. Learning is not disconnected from the context. So from your school community, there needs to be a real connection that's taking you through the spiral between the things that you're thinking about and the context of your community itself. Learning is not just about a set of strategies without deeper purpose and understanding of that purpose. And it's not a short-term or quick fix. So the spiral of inquiry demands that new learning, how and what we're going to learn, emerges through the scan itself, is sharpened through the focusing stage, and is informed by the hunches that we've developed. So in this quote here from Timperley, Kayser and Halbert, we can see the influence of the stages of the spiral that have come before that take us to the stage of learning and the new learning and what we're going to do with that. The main challenge really in this stage is to decide what to learn and how to learn it. But we also need to hold in mind our 5 principles of well-being when we're doing this. And just as a reminder, we can see in the circle diagram here that they are belonging, agency, efficacy, safety, and love. The learning stage is where we might need access to expertise or specialist knowledge around the chosen subject. It might be that we access our kind of wider community, professional community who are linked to our school communities, colleagues like educational psychology, like advisory teachers, and other organisations that we work closely with on a daily or weekly basis. Simply doing what has always been done and hoping for a different response is not going to be a helpful kind of approach for your community or for the spiral process. So learning asks us to take a step into the kind of unknown, to find out the things that we need to know to be able to develop a whole school approach to wellbeing in our community. And of course we know that wellbeing doesn't thrive if people are told what to do. So including everybody in the decision-making process allows us collaboratively to work and analyse the information around what is going on for the well-being of the school community as a whole. So how do we do at the stage of learning? What are the kind of activities involved as we reach this stage of the spiral of inquiry? So we're looking at, why are we choosing to take action where we are? What have we learned so far that can help us with that? So the first consideration really is to ensure that new learning is directly connected to the focus that has been determined and informed by the hunches that were developed in the previous stage. A second and significant consideration is how to free up the time for those who need to be deeply, and emphasize I think the word deeply, engaged in the new learning that is required. How will that process take place? What resources, what supports, what kind of partners might be needed to be accessed in relation to that? The learning stage is not a time for what we might call kind of bolt-ons. It is instead a process of exploring why a new strategy might work, trying it out, reviewing it with others and modifying it to try again. So there's a stage, I suppose one of the implications here, especially in the third box down, is that there's a stage here of kind of finding out or gathering feedback from the community about whether they feel this approach would work, and of course avoiding the pre-packaged solutions or bolt-ons that we've spoken about as maybe not coherent to the needs of your school community. And of course the learning stage offers us an opportunity to modify the approach to suit your community. It really connects back to what we've spoken about around the uniqueness of each school community. So the idea that kind of pre-packaged solutions might not fit the exact way that your school functions, the particular needs that your community might have, and instead it creates the space for an approach to be modified to meet those needs or to work in a way that that fits with how you operate as a school community. So we come back to the vignette, which has taken us really through the stages of the spiral of inquiry so far, and there's a space here to now think about this vignette and what that might mean for this learning stage. So just to kind of we've got a slight update here. So during the developing a hunch phase, a number of hunches emerged as a result of exploration of the previous phases. You were interested in reports of feelings of the lack of connection reported by both parents and teachers, and you started to wonder what this meant for parent experiences of belonging to the school community. You also became interested in how teaching staff were coping with practicing in the current COVID situation and what this might mean for their well-being. You reflected on how sometimes parents' evenings involved teachers having more tricky conversations with parents and how these might be more difficult to achieve online. You wondered if this could also be contributing to the sense of a lack of connection experienced. And the question that we have here in this learning phase is, how and where will you learn more about what to do? So two things really is, what are the things that you really feel like you need to learn about here in relation to this vignette, and where will you access those learning opportunities? At this stage, we're going to ask you to pause the training, maybe have a think about this question and in relation to the vignette the stage of the vignette that you're seeing, and then we'll come back for some reflective questions afterwards. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to think about the vignette, the learning stage of the vignette that we've looked at. What we have here is a reminder of the spiral of inquiry diagram and the stage that we're at currently in the process. And we were really curious about how and where In relation to the vignette, will you learn more about what to do? How did you decide who needed to be involved in that learning stage of the process? And what are your thoughts about the learning stage overall? How does it feel? How does it connect with you in relation to your own school community? What will the learning stage be like for you? What do you see as the challenges and the opportunities through that stage? When we did this activity in the live training, we asked our attendees to go into cluster groups to have a think about what they might do in relation to each of the stages of the spiral. And this was some of the feedback that we received from the learning activity stage. So one group were talking about, as heads, we were thinking about Estin and their categories. If a school was leading in practice, they wouldn't want to share it, as they might mean they might lose that title. So there's an issue arising here around how we share learning across our schools and across our clusters. Same thing might look different in different schools as we have different people. We mustn't keep ideas to ourselves. It ties in well with the new curriculum. We see what others are doing and adapt it for our own school. And then another group we're talking about, we were looking at additional means on top of parents' evening to break down the perceived disconnectedness between school and parents. We would also look at a means to regularly capture staff and student voice and how that would lead into improvement planning.